Hey everybody, this is Roger from UpSparq, your personal and business consulting and coaching solution. And I'm here today to talk about Trello and give you kind of a brief overview of how I use it for Scrum board management. So Scrum is a project management system, very straightforward, very effective system being used across the world for different types of projects, including personal and business. And this is a sample Scrum board that I put together for a trip to Carnival. I've never been to Carnival. I've never been to Rio or Brazil. So this actually fascinates me a lot. I think this would be a great place for us to take a look at and get some ideas about how to use Trello for Scrum. So hopefully you've had a chance to review the Trello introduction video that they produce, and that might help you understand a little bit more about the system itself and some of the things that you can do with it. And this is a completely flexible system that you can use how I show you, or you can use it to your heart's content and make it work for you. It has a lot of options. This is just one way of doing it, but let's get started. So first of all, you have five columns across the top up here. You have ideas, groomed/ready, sprint number 1, backlog, sprint number 1 in progress, and sprint number 1 done. So if you recall from your Scrum training or your Scrum research into the methodology, you basically start with ideation. What do we think we can do? What are some good ideas that we just pop into our heads? Maybe we'll have a session at some point. Think of these as your electronic back of the napkin ideas. You could just drop it in whenever you want to. Trello has a mobile application. I find myself often thinking about ideas when I'm not even close to a computer, and I will simply upload a card right there on the spot with some different ideas. Cards in this case are what we call stories. That's these items right here that you see highlighted. And they are part of these lists. These lists could be considered, kind of a project silo, if you will. We'll just go through it, and we'll work through, and it'll hopefully make some sense to you. So we're going to start with a process with our stories here on the left-hand side under ideas. So this idea is the story is about requesting our birth certificate. Well, why do we need our birth certificate? Well, part of our trip to Rio, Carnival in Rio, is going to include getting a passport. We don't have a passport yet, so we need to request a passport. Inevitably, they require a birth certificate, so we're going to take care of that. So here is our request birth certificate idea or story. Now you'll note that I've already done a little bit of work on here to show you the description. We have as a person that wants a passport and has lost a birth certificate. So basically, when you describe a story, you describe it in who it affects, what is that person doing, and why are they doing it. Okay, so as a person that needs a passport, I need to request that a birth certificate be sent to me so that I can provide it to the passport issuing agency, in this case the US government. And underneath here we have a checklist. There are multiple options: download and print the birth certificate, mail in the application, and receive the birth certificate back. Note that these are just checklists, and I have a checklist button over here on the right hand side. Whenever I click it, I get the option of a checklist. I can name it a title if I want to, or I can just leave it checklist, and then I can add items to it as I need to. I may also want to write some comments about it. Maybe find out what county address might be. So I might put that under my comments, for example. Up here at the top, you'll see this option for labels. Labels are actually very useful. You don't have to use them. You don't have to even touch them at all, but they're useful for filtering, and I like them very much. So in this case, I made our labels groomed, which means that they have been worked through. Then I have low priority, medium priority, and high priority, and then no priority. That's really just an idea that it can get done whenever it gets done, no problem. And so what we've got here is pretty closely groomed story. I don't know that there'd be much more I'd want to add to this, so I'm going to go ahead and make it groomed. And then I'm going to take that idea and I'm going to move it over to my groomed and ready folder. Okay. Also note that I think this is a high priority issue. In fact, applying for a passport is a lengthy process, can take several weeks, and I need to get that process going. Okay. So again, these are my ideas. This is my groomed and ready folder. And I'm going to do one more for my ideas here and see what it needs to be ready to go and be groomed. So again, as a visitor, I'm a WHO, as a visitor to Brazil, what do I want to do? I want to get suggested immunizations. Why? So that I remain healthy both during and after my visit there. And very important. You know, we don't really know what we have going on down there. So here's my checklist. I'm going to Google for any relevant websites. I think I found a website earlier. Maybe I did a little brief research during my planning backlog grooming session. And I've got a link here to go to already. A couple things, I've already been to a place before, so I kind of know I need to go to my travel health doctor at my uh, health group, my HMO health group, and then get any recommended vaccinations. So again, checklist looks pretty solid. So I think I'm going to go with that. I'm going to call it groomed. Now remember, you're doing this during the backlog grooming session that you have with yourself, right? You have your project, you have your ideas. Some of your ideas have been fleshed out. As you can see here, there's a couple here that are green for groomed. We can take that over. We can move that over to our groomed and ready folder, obtain a plane ticket. Let's see, book a flight. Yep, nothing more extravagant than that. So we're going to move that over here during our grooming session. You know, during our grooming session, we might decide book a flight. Well, how about I research the flight options? You know, do I want to fly on a red eye versus a connecting flight, something like that. So I'm going to add that. You can sort these, which is very helpful. So I'm going to sort that up front because I need to research really before I book the flight. I don't need to do anything with labels. It is a medium priority right now. And that looks good. So I'm going to pull that over. It's groomed. Okay. And here's my last one that has a groomed status. We have seen this one already. And I'm going to pull that over to my groomed. Now, we know that immunizations often take some time to take effect, so that's the reason why I'm marking this as a high priority. So I've got a bunch of issues here, a bunch of stories in my groomed and ready folder, and I'm going to put them over into my sprint. I really need to know more about Rio and more about Carnival, so I think that's an important one. I want to put that into my first sprint. I definitely want to request a birth certificate, and I would like to get my passport started. Now there are obviously there is a dependency. I have to get my birth certificate before I get my passport. So this passport story may wind up getting pressed into a different sprint. So we'll see. We're going to do what we can first on our request birth certificate and then work up from there. And lastly, I think I have time in my sprint to review health warnings and then go get any immunizations that I might find they're important. Recall that you want your sprints to be discrete and specific time frames. So in this case, I have it flagged to start in August 24th through September 6th. This is just a comment or a name on the list. So you can name it whatever you want, and you can make your sprints whatever length that you want. I've seen sprints go from 1, 2, or 3 weeks. I like 2 weeks, but 1 week is just fine. 3 weeks is a little long, especially for one person. I think that if I were going to pick a length, I would probably go for a 1 or a 2 week sprint. What's important is that you find and make tasks for yourself, stories for yourself that you can get done in that time frame, right? So don't make the sprint so short and your stories so large that you can't get them done. The idea is to get what you have in your story backlog finished for that sprint. If that makes sense. Okay, so let's just work a couple of these and we'll see what we got. We're going to research the traditions of the Carnival. And so, like I said, I had never been there before, so I'm going to do a little search through Google and find out a little bit more about it. Really, I don't even know what the date is and when it happens. So coincidentally, I already have a search loaded, and it looks like Carnival begins on February 5th and ends on February 10th. So as long as Google has that right, that's going to be a really good thing to know. So I think I'm going to put this in the description. Although I normally reserve the description for just the statement of the story, like a who and the what am I doing and the why am I doing it, this is really important, and I think it's worth highlighting. I could also put it in comments. So I think I'm going to put it in both just for illustration's sake. But you can take your pick. So save my comment. This is actually a nice feature of Trello. Notice that I didn't push the save button when I was editing the description. It's telling me that you have unsaved edits. So I'm going to view my edits and I'm going to save it. It does that in a number of fields, so that's actually a very helpful thing. There's another thing to note about this particular story. Notice that we have a picture, and I attached a picture as an attachment. I can remove that as a cover image from this particular card if I want to, but I don't have to. And it doesn't have to just be pictures. So let's say, for example, that I find a really interesting PDF from a tourist company, a tour guide company, and I think it was worth attaching to this. Or maybe there's some kind of cultural information that I can find in a PDF or a doc file or something along those lines. I can attach that to this story, and it follows that story from that point forward. Okay, so here's my checklist. Do a search on Google and find out when the parade is. Well, I did it, so I'm good with that. I'm going to check that off. That makes me 100% done. Okay. It doesn't also, I don't also have to get everything right in the planning session. Maybe I decide, you know what, actually, I would like to research more about the history of Carnival. When did it start? For example. Okay. So I'm going to add that. Now I'm back down to 50%, and that's okay. We'll come back and I'll look at that later. I'm not going to worry about it for now, but I did want to illustrate that you can add items and it's okay to do that. But I still want to get this story done in this sprint, so don't add too much. If you think that you're going to start to go over or you're going to add too many more tasks to an individual story, start putting them in ideas. Start putting them over here. Here's another one. This is a good one. So as a visitor to Brazil, who am I? Visitor. I want to get immunizations so that I remain healthy. And we talked about this. So I've Googled relevant websites. I found a relevant website. Here's my Google. And here's the CDC page. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. And I'm looking around and I'm doing a little research. Looks like I might need a hepatitis A shot, not uncommon. Typhoid. Depending on where you go, you might need some rabies or yellow fever. What else do we have in here? Bug bites. That's interesting. Okay, what about bug bites? Mosquitoes, ticks. Oh, I remember mosquitoes transmit malaria. So probably a really good idea to get myself some repellent, some DEET. Definitely. All right. So I'm going to copy that, and I have in here, let's see, I've reviewed this. I'm going to add an item, get some DEET. All right. So that dropped me down a little bit on my checklist, but that's really important, and that came out of this particular review and the work that I'm doing here. But you know what? That's going to take me some time. I think that I'm going to have to make a trip or even go to Amazon or something and find that. So instead of leaving it as a checklist item for this particular story, I'm going to convert it to its own story or its own card. And now you'll note that it's not in the list anymore. And it has been added to the bottom of this current sprint backlog that we're here right now. So I'm going to pull that back over to my ideas. It's not ready to go yet. And I can hear some of you screaming out there right now at me because I have done something that I actually don't like to do, which is leave everything in the backlog and just work on it. So while I'm working on stuff, I should be pulling it over to in progress. So thank you for everybody who I can hear yelling at me right now to pull my items over into in progress for anything that I'm currently working on. So get some DEET. Let me finish this off just a little bit since I copied and pasted that text. Website says, there we go. So I'm going to keep track of that. And I'm going to leave it in ideas for now. It doesn't need to have anything else done to it. I will come back to that during a grooming session later on. But that gives me enough information to remember why I put it over there in the first place. Okay, so going back here, Let's see, how much more do we really have to do here? Okay, let's assume that I went ahead and I've done some research on the history of Carnival. I was very fascinated by it. It was good stuff, and I'm done. I think I have enough information to continue forward on the trip. Sounds like it's going to be a great time. So I've got my dates, which are important, and I have my history, which is important. I feel like this story is finished. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move it over to done. And let's see, this one's a really important one. I really want to apply for a passport. So again, here's those images I just attached, and you can remove it from being a cover image if you want to. I'm going to visit the Department of State and find out how to get a passport, and I did that. So let's just assume that I've done that for training. And then I'm going to get my passport photo. I'm done with that. I've printed out my application. Oops, I don't have my copy of my birth certificate because I haven't taken care of that yet. And it also takes several weeks to make this happen. So at this point, I'm thinking, you know what, I should probably put a due date on this. So I'm going to put a due date that corresponds with the ending of my sprint, but I can change that. And there's a really good chance that this card's going to go over from this sprint to another sprint because I have to wait on my birth certificate for no other reason. So I'm going to go ahead and I've put this over in process. Again, I'm supposed to put it over in process. I'm getting stuff done, and then it's sitting there for a while, 3 out of 5 tasks done. So let's review some health warnings here. Let's pretend that I've been and visited with my travel health doctor and that I have gotten any of my recommended vaccinations. They weren't fun. I hate shots. And now that one looks good. The checklist is at 100%. You don't have to use checklists. I like them. Even if I have one task, I like having a checklist, but it is totally optional. If you have more than one task, I definitely recommend it. And so I've gotten my vaccinations. I'm good on that, and I'm going to move it over to the done column for sprint 1. Now, this passport is a little tricky, and it really is going to take me getting my birth certificate first. I don't know what I did with it. I lost it. So I'm going to download and print the birth certificate application. I'm going to mail it, and I'm going to have to wait because I haven't received it yet. So I'm going to go ahead and consider that one done as much as I can get it for right now. And let's pretend that we're advancing the calendar and we're getting up to September 6th. Okay, so we've arrived at about September 6th, and we're doing our grooming session and our planning session, and good on us because we did everything that we could do in our sprint 1. And we know that we're going to have a couple of ongoing issues. So we could do this in a few ways. You can, I would actually do this because I like to be as ultra organized as I can get. And this is probably overkill, but I'm going to follow through with it anyway. So 9/7/2015, and let's see, that's going to be 9/7 to 9/20. Okay, and this is going to be my backlog for sprint number 2. So I have my sprint backlog for sprint 2. Okay, and it's becoming really clear that my request a birth certificate is not going to make it in time. I still have to wait for that. So I'm going to go ahead and forward that over to my sprint 2 backlog. And I'm going to forward over my passport to my sprint 2 backlog. Now, what this means is I have sprint 1 all the way through, backlog, in progress, and done, sitting here, and I don't need them anymore, right? I've gotten done with what I needed to get done over here. So what I can do is I'm going to archive this list. Okay, or you can archive all cards in this list if you choose not to. If you choose to just simply use sprint, whatever, and rename these folders, that's perfectly acceptable as well. But I'm going to archive this list. Okay, and I'm going to archive my sprint 1 in progress, and I'm going to archive my sprint 1 backlog. Now again, this is more tedious. Sprint number 2 in progress. And sprint, I forgot the number 2, but sprint number 2 done. Okay, change this again. Again, really super easy to change stuff. Not hard at all. It's very, very flexible that way. Okay, So we've got our Sprint 2 backlog. We know that we're still waiting for our birth certificate and our passport. We're back in our planning session, and let's see, there are some things over here that we should probably get to sooner rather than later. We can't do the Brazilian visa yet because we need our passport. We have to wait for that. But maybe we want to request time off for work. Maybe we want to obtain our plane ticket, and those actually make a lot of sense. Okay. And so we're kind of in the middle of our sprint number 2, and lo and behold, in the mail, I get my birth certificate. That's good news. So now that I have my birth certificate, well, again, I should have been in process. Actually, both of these are still in progress because they were active from the last sprint. Now I've gotten my birth certificate. I'm done with that. That's good news. So now I can get my passport done. So I've got a copy of my birth certificate, and I'm going to mail in my stuff. So we're done. In progress, we're done with that. We're going to move it over here. In the meantime, maybe I want to obtain a plane ticket. I'm going to move it over in progress, or in process, however you want to say it, and then go ahead and search for a plane ticket. Once I found a plane ticket and made my reservation, I'm going to go ahead and move that over into the done column as well. And that's generally how the flow works, from one column to the next until basically there's nothing left over here and here, and everything gets over to the done column. And that may take 1 sprint, 2 sprints, 3 sprints, it doesn't matter. You just keep working it over and over again, iteratively, until you're done. Now, there's a couple of things that are worth noting here. So we already talked about the grooming session and the backlog grooming session to make sure that you have as much detail in your stories as you need. Right now there's 0 detail in here. Maybe I want to do a little research on flight tracking applications. I actually know a couple, and they're actually very good to have. So that would be helpful. Just stuff like that. So maybe I need to come over here, do my planning, and get those built out. I also want to do what I would call a retrospective. Okay. In the retrospective, I may back up just a little bit and say, you know what, I really didn't need to apply for a passport until I had my birth certificate. Like I said, ideally, your sprints will contain a discrete time frame, and everything that you said you were going to do in the sprint gets done. Okay, and that's not what happened here. So we want to go back in time during our retrospective to figure out why didn't we get done. And it's perfectly, what happened here was perfectly acceptable, but it's not ideal, and we want continuous improvement. So I probably would tell myself, you know what, self, go ahead and hold off on doing a passport because it has a dependency on the birth certificate. Get that one done first. It's okay. Either way, we're going to forgive ourselves, not worry about it, and move on. But you can see how this works. I had a big long list, and I had a long list here, and it's getting shorter on this side, the left, and it's working its way to the right. Let me show you a little bit of filtering and a couple of things here that you can use. So first, one of the things that you can do is add members. So if you have somebody else who is a Trello person registered with Trello already, you can add them in here, and you can give them various permissions. It's really, really, really cool to be able to offer permissions to different people, and like for example, here you go, commenting permissions, invitation permissions. If somebody is in as a member, you can turn off whether they can edit, whether they can view, whatever the case is. You do get a limited amount of permissions flexibility with a free account, and this is entirely done with a free account, what you're seeing right now. You can pay for it, and you do get more features, and a lot of those features center around permissions and more business focused. But as an individual, you don't need it. I would totally recommend just using a personal account. But you might want to add other members. Maybe, for example, you're not the only one going down to Carnival. Maybe you have a wife or a husband or a significant other in your life, or kids, or somebody that you want to take down with you. You may want to get them involved as well, because they may have to do this kind of stuff too. They may also have to go get their own passport, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the other things you can do, let's see, of interest. We talked about labels a little bit. I used this structure. You don't have to. One of my other projects, I use not low, medium, and high priority, but I use constituency. What constituency does that particular item affect, that story affect? So for example, if it's a marketing story, or it's a project, a website story, or it affects clients in a specific way, then I will check those off, and that will be how I track the constituents that are involved in it. I do still have groomed. I think this is actually a very important one because it immediately gives you a visual indicator on whether your stories are fit for applying to your backlog, to your sprints. So immediately you can tell that it's not here yet, it's not ready. Even if it's not in this column, or even if it is in this column and it was missing that, you could see it really quickly. So I'm a big believer in groomed, but you can manage your labels however you want to manage them. You can make them about priority, you can make them about constituents that they affect, doesn't matter. It's up to you. Play with it a little bit and see what works for you. Archived items. So I archived Sprint 1's lists, and you can see those. So I've got my lists right here. I can pull them back into my board if I want to. I don't have to, but if I want to, I can. It looks like I have hidden my, let's see, it looks like I've hidden the cards in the done folder. So I may want to pull it back onto the board if I want to see those again. And ultimately, to be honest with you, what I would probably do is this. I would send the Sprint 1 done back to the board, and I would archive all my cards. And that way, when I went over here to the cards, I would see it right away. But again, this is something that you can play with. You could, instead of making whole new lists, simply rename the old lists and reuse them again. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I can't see a reason why that doesn't work great. So let's, there was a filtering option that I kind of wanted to explore a little bit if I can find it. So filter cards, this is also very helpful. This is another reason to use labels where you can tell it what you want to look at. So for example, groomed and high priority, these are probably the ones that I'm going to tackle first. But maybe not. Especially, I'm most likely going to want to look at groom for sure and then see where it goes from there. You also have other filters down here for doing the next day and the next week and the next month. I didn't do anything with due dates on this particular set, so that doesn't apply. Here is, well, here is this guy right here, sprint number 2. Get this out of the way. So when you have your filter on, you do only see what you pick. So remember that, and you can turn it off right away. Okay, I think that we have covered everything that I wanted to cover today. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. My email address is roger, R-O-G-E-R, at UpSparq, UpSparq.com. And I would be happy to help you and even give you access to being able to view this particular board if that would help. So feel free to reach out for any of your consulting or coaching needs, and I look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thanks so much for sticking around.